issue of succession management is a big one for many corporates in South Africa, and very few organizations get it right. Importantly, it requires special planning to see young leaders progress from being managers to being executive directors sitting on a board one day. One company which appears to have taken an innovative approach to this is the financial services group Alexander Forbes. We'll be taking a look at the thinking behind their succession planning and some of the learnings from it. We've got Blessé Tete and Kristin-Ann, chairperson and deputy chairperson of the Alexander Forbes Junior Board, joining us on the desk. Thank you so much for joining us. So Blessing, as the chairperson, tell us about the kind of motivation behind Alexander Forbes launching this and essentially launched this year in around April, May this year.
Well, I think you've actually mentioned exactly what Alexander Forbes was trying to do by setting up the junior board. It's in fact one of the platforms that Alexander Forbes has put in place for leadership development and grooming the next generation of leaders into, as you said, onto the various executive committees and the actual board. So it's one of the practical ways that Alexander Forbes is investing in the young professionals in the business.
I assume you essentially wear two hats. I mean, you wear one as being a board person, but you also have a day-to-day job. If without trying to confuse the roles. I mean, essentially you're developing leadership while still performing a function within the business.
That's correct. In my case, I'm head of client services in our operations and administration business, and alongside with that, I've been appointed the chairman of the junior board. And essentially, what we realized is that we needed to look at the sort of high performers in our business, so that you could actually be able to juggle the two between your normal job, because this is something that you're actually doing over and above your normal course of duty.
Kristin, you look like you were nodding and looking like it's quite a tough job to balance the two roles that you now have essentially.
Yeah, it is quite a tough job. My real job is being a healthcare actuary at Alexander Forbes Health. And with that, and I think in the financial services industry, not very many people actually work 9 to 5 anyway in their real jobs. So it is quite a lot, and you're leading your own team within your workplace as well as the board, and two different things to focus on. But I love it. It's really exciting, and you get so many opportunities that you would never even have dreamt of before.
Maybe just quick, one thing I find interesting, maybe a question to both of you, but like, how do you work with your peers? I mean, where you've kind of been singled out as being a high performer, and it's one of the interesting things about how you bring talent through an organization. But I mean, you've been identified as having some leadership potential. You've been appointed to this junior board. How do does it change the way you interact with your colleagues?
It shouldn't change. You shouldn't have to change the way you interact with your colleagues, because you should be interacting with them well anyway. Part of the criteria for participating on the junior board was, one, that you had to be a good performer at your job, but also, I don't know, nice person's not the right word, but you've got to instill the culture and live the values of the company already. One thing you probably have to be more aware of now is just watching yourself and making sure that you continue to behave in an appropriate way. Sometimes, we all get irritated at work. You just need to hold your breath and move forward in a professional manner.
What sort of initiatives have you instituted as part of the board? What has been your mandate so far?
So we take our mandate from the group executive committee. So we don't, in a corporate sense, we don't have any legal authority. But what happens is that we are allowed to give strategic input into executive decisions. So one of the things that we're looking at from a strategy perspective is looking at the retail market. And one of the initiatives that we're looking at as the junior board is how we can increase Alexander Forbes penetration into that retail market. So whilst Group Exco is looking at their strategic initiatives in that respect, we can also give input into that strategic conversation to enhance the business's footprint.
Because I think that's one thing that really frustrates a lot of young, talented people in organizations, is you've got a great idea, you want to tell the big boss about it, you want somebody to actually do something about it, but you often just get cut out by the levels of middle management in between it. I mean, again, it comes back to managing a dynamic, though. I mean, you've now suddenly been given access to really the big cheese in the organisation. You can say, I want to execute this idea. I mean, but then you have the flip side of it, and you don't really have a standing or authority in it. I mean, how do you manage that kind of progression or communication?
Yeah. I think in our organisation we've got a fairly open interaction with our executive committee, our group executive, and our chief sponsor is actually our group chief executive officer. So we've got access to our group chief executive, Mr. Edward Kisweta, pretty much literally when we need to see him. We also attend. We have a slot at our group executive committee meeting. So there is various opportunities in which we can interact with various members of Group X. And one of the things in terms of leadership development is that part of the initiatives of the junior board was to have the mentorship being happening between executive members and the junior board members. So that's also an opportunity in which we're grooming the next generation of leaders in terms of how to take strategic decisions.
The whole issue of succession planning really was thrust into the spotlight with Cynthia Carroll resigning, and no clarity on who the new CEO would be, whether they'd be coming from within the company or coming from outside. Do you think that this plays an important role, for example, having a junior board in succession planning with regards to grooming you to become a leader? Because the issue that perhaps would be on the table is you're very much involved in strategically looking at where the company is going, but are you involved in managing and playing a leadership role? How do you fit those two into your board position?
Within the board, part of it is leadership development. A lot of the junior board members have been put on the company's leadership program. We've developed a leadership program that's targeted at 100 people. When those 100 people have gone through that program, the next 100 or so will go through it as well. We've got on the junior board, we've got members that are from very, very junior levels to very, very senior levels, so it's a complete mix. Most of us do have people reporting to us anyway, so we do have that management responsibility. And then on the board, you've got to show that leadership. You've got to be a leader to be on the board, because we're not just targeting the 13 members who are on the board. It's about us also giving back to the rest of the business. When we went through our nomination process, there were 135 people that were nominated, and they all showed tremendous talent and a lot of potential. So, the business is giving to us in terms of developing us as leaders, but it's also then for us to develop downwards.
Maybe it's a bit of a loaded question here, but I throw them in from time to time. But let's assume that the board of Forbes happened to get wiped out in a plane crash tomorrow. I mean, would you guys be naturally able to basically be absorbed into that role?
I think to be honest, I think it's early days for this board, and I think there are various structures in the business in terms of that type of succession. We obviously would not be, if you can look at the sort of age criteria that we've looked at that age criteria that's between 25 and 35 to be on that board. So these are people that do not necessarily come out of a graduate trainee program. They're people that have been in our business for some time, and you'd find that at the top end of it, they're people that are pretty much in leadership positions. Some of us sit on our various divisional executive committees. Yep. But other than that, there would still be another layer in which people would still be groomed into becoming the next group executive members.
Do you think it enhances loyalty to the business? Because I think this has been one of the big issues for 2012. Is that a lot of businesses have seen cost cutting. They've seen a lot of a lack of loyalty. You're always looking at the person next to you saying, am I the next person to get cut? And I think that's just typical cost cutting cycle. But do you think that initiatives like this actually increase loyalty? You'll say, I'll be part of this business for the next 10 years because I believe I'm going somewhere?
I agree with that. I think it definitely does, because what we did was we looked at one of the criteria that we used in selecting the junior board members was those people that would be true Alexander Forbes brand ambassadors. So those are people that we would believe that are very loyal to the business. But one of the other things that the junior board has done is just in terms of employee engagement across the group. It's another alternative way of communicating for group executive. You're communicating to another channel within the business. These are people that are in the trenches within the business, not necessarily as high level as the group executive members. So, we've created things like our Twitter communication within the business. We've got an intranet site that we utilize, and we're getting ideas from the business across in terms of various things, just basically from the day-to-day things of how people are feeling in the business. So generally, from an employee engagement perspective, it's quite a positive thing.
I just want to stop you there. 'Cause, you're talking about the Twitter thing. Your CEO is very active on Twitter. Do you think that you guys have had a contribution to be able to bring the rest of the organisation, make an awareness of something like Twitter?
Within the organisation?
Yeah, I mean, basically. So
Just kind of new ways of communicating.
Yes, that's one of our objectives, and that's my baby because I'm a Facebook and Twitter freak. But we've got our own Twitter account. Alexander Forbes has its own Twitter account, so does Investment Solutions. Our CEO is also, he likes to call himself a young CEO because he loves these alternative ways of communicating. So he's on Twitter all the time. Our ultimate goal is to have more followers than he does. But I think social media, for me, it's a great way to go, and it's easy to communicate. I think it's a great way to go, and I think we are getting there.